And good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of your radio magazine, Voices of the Tri-States. Hey folks, today we are talking solar. Eagle Point Solar of Dubuque. One of the owners is in the studio with me, Larry Steffen. He is also the Executive Vice President of Eagle Point Solar. With that, Larry, good afternoon. Thanks for joining me here today.
I am happy to be here.
Alrighty. Well, solar, sunshiny demeanor. I think that's a good thing, Larry. So, well, let's talk about, I want to get down to some of the basics, but before I say that, I also want to mention you are president of the Iowa Solar Energy Trade Association. We'll kind of get into a little bit about what that is as well. But tell me, when I say solar, what does that mean?
It's obviously a question that we address on every person that we talk to. And one thing that I'm adamant about, not only through Eagle Point Solar, but also through the Iowa Solar Trade Association, is we're very big on education. And I encourage people, is one of the first things that you need to do is to educate yourself on just about everything solar that's out there. There's a lot of information that's out there. Most of it is accurate. Some of it is not. Okay. But if you sit down with somebody, like myself, I am going to say, we need to educate you, we need to answer your questions, and we need to teach you how to do the math. Because a solar project is simply a math problem, and it's an easy math problem. You just need to know where to put the numbers. And that's how we start. That's where people begin their project. Let's learn first, okay? So when I talk to people about that, they'll say, okay, well, how much does a solar array cost? Oh, hang on a second here.
Before the education.
Yeah, okay. Hang on here a little bit. Why don't we educate you first? So one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to tell them about how solar works. I'll probably say something like, this isn't rocket science. It's pretty simple. The technology of how it works really hasn't changed for the last 50 years. You get a solar panel or a solar module, you put it on your house or you put it on the ground. That's going to collect the sun. It's going to create direct current. That direct current, DC, has to be inverted to alternating a current, AC, which is done by another component, which is the inverter. And that AC, or that electricity, is connected to the load center in your house, your farm, your business, your church, or your school. And that load center, that electrical panel, is connected to your meter, and your meter is connected to the utility. And that's how it works. So solar panel, inverter, electrical service panel, utility meter, and utility. That is what we term a grid-tied system. What that means is we are not eliminating the utility. We're using the utility in conjunction with the solar array because you still need to have power overnight. Okay? I said earlier, this is not rocket science. Solar arrays don't work at night.
All right.
Okay? So that's why when you build it like that, we typically build, in the vast majority of our cases, what we call a grid-tied system. And that's what I just described to you.
How did you get into this type of work before we go further down the road of how did you say, wow, this is something that's going to be an emerging technology, which it still is, and people are still trying to find out, what is it and can I use it? Is it effective for me? How did you get involved in this?
One of my partners is a guy named Jim Pullen. Jim Pullen happens to be our president and CEO, but I've known Jim since 1992.
Okay.
And when my wife and I were moving back to the Dubuque area from central Iowa, we started to have a couple of conversations about, what is Larry going to do when he gets back to Dubuque? And he was already working at Eagle Point Solar, under the original founder of Eagle Point Solar. And we started to have a couple of conversations, and he says, hey, this is going to be big. There's something that we can build here. It's not complicated, and you'll love it. It's easy. And that's how I got into solar business.
That's the start of it. Okay.
That's the start.
So, alrighty. So tell me about the equipment and warranties. I think one of the things that folks, when they see this on the side of a house and they're thinking, and you mentioned kind of the components of it, but tell me about, when it all gets put together. What are we looking at here?
Okay. First of all, when you look at a solar panel itself, though that's a piece of equipment, it's an electronic module that has a 25 or even a 30-year warranty. Okay. And I think one of the misconceptions that some people have is these things last 10, 12, or 15 years. No, the warranty, for production and the componentry is 25 years. The life expectancy of a typical Tier 1 rated solar module is over 40 years. So what that tells people right away is when you build a solar array, it's going to be around for a long time, because the solar panel itself just doesn't quit on day one of year number 26.
Right.
It will continue to produce energy as the years go by. So, and these solar modules, the technology of how it works hasn't changed. The efficiency has gone up. The output has gone up due to technology changes. So when we build solar arrays, it's really odd that we would have an issue with a solar panel. Okay? They simply sit there. They sit there and they collect energy.
There's not a lot of moving parts in this, is there?
Yeah, there's no moving parts.
Yep.
My solar array has been on my house, for the last 8.5 years, and I have not touched it because there's no reason for me to do that. Okay? So then you move into the second component, which is the inverter. The inverter is the brain box of the system. That's what inverts the direct current to alternating current. That particular component or piece of equipment is what we use as a company to monitor the solar array. And somebody as a buyer of a solar array has the ability to monitor the production. They can monitor it by the month, by the year, by the day, depending on what level they want. So those are two very key components. The warranty on the inverters for our typical residential array is also 25 years.
You don't get many things that are 25 years these days, do you?
that is correct. And I think the reason the inverter companies are going to a 25-year warranty is because of the fact that it matches the solar panel warranty.
Okay, makes sense.
So, and that's what I want people to understand is, this is going to be around a long time.
Right.
It's going to be a long-term investment.
So let's talk about the utility solar policy. And that's something I think there's a lot of confusion with too, is that somebody said, well, if I make too much power, I get dinged from the electric company, or if I don't make enough, my rates go up. Tell me about that.
The utility policy is something that I cover in literally every solar seminar that I do, and I do hundreds of them a year. And I'm adamant about making sure that people understand it, because utility policy regarding solar is similar from company to company, but there are slight differences. And the question that you bring up is, okay, if I build a solar array, what happens when my solar array is producing more than what I need?
Right.
Where does the power go?
Yeah.
Well, the power goes back through your load center, through your meter, and it physically goes back to the utility, whether that would be Alliant Energy or maybe one of the local rural co-ops, whoever's listed in this area.
Right.
And the utilities do not store that excess power. What they're going to do is they're going to sell it to the next person that needs it. Okay? Some utilities will give you a kilowatt hour of electricity credit that you can use later at a point in time when the solar array isn't functioning. Okay? There's a term that people need to be familiar with, and that term is called net metering. Net metering just simply says, when I send excess power to my utility, they are going to give me credit at a 1-to-1 ratio based on what I pay for it. Okay? That's a very attractive solar policy. And I just described the policy that Alliant Energy has. They have a very attractive solar policy because of their net metering tariff. Okay? Other utilities may not have a net metering policy. And in that case, if they don't do that, you will get credit for excess power, but the credit that you might receive, could be 3 cents on the dollar, 4 cents on the dollar. It doesn't mean that the solar policy is bad. It's just different. And that's why when I talk to people about this, You, as a homeowner or as a business owner, you have to understand that. Because if you do not, you're potentially setting yourself up to be really disappointed in your solar array.
Okay.
And that's unfortunate, because if people don't understand it, then they might gravitate towards the negative and say, I didn't get what I bought.
Yeah, I thought I was going to get a lot in return for this, and I didn't. And sometimes I blame national advertising, because I think some of that stuff is very confusing, where they talk about, oh, yes, you do this and you're going to make all these millions of dollars back. And I don't know, Larry, you're not going to make millions back, but I think you are going to, in most part, like you said, depending on where you're at and what the utility does, I think in many cases, it may pay for itself.
That is absolutely correct. And that's why, when we start to go down what the process is, and when I start talking about how the math works, you're going to understand why understanding your utility policy is critical.
Very good. And again, I want to remind our audience, today we're talking with Larry Steffen. He is from Eagle Point Solar. He is one of the owners as well as executive vice president of the company. Okay, solar incentives, we hear about that. That's a little confusing too, of who has them and where they come from. So tell me about that.
Yeah, you're correct. When you talk about solar incentives, I think some of a misconception that people have is that one of the primary solar incentives out there is a federal investment tax credit, okay? And people get the tax credit confused with a rebate, okay? The investment tax credit for solar is not a rebate. It's not a check that the federal government's going to send to you, okay? And people get that misconstrued. The federal tax credit is a dollar-for-dollar deduction off of what you owe on your federal taxes, okay? That's how the calculation is done. Now, the current tax credit for solar is 30% of whatever your solar array costs, okay? So just to make the math easy, if your solar array is $20,000, 30% of $20,000, your federal tax credit eligibility is $6,000. That's a number that you would take to whomever's doing, your taxes when you get your taxes done and say, how can I take advantage of this? Can I take advantage of it in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years? You can amortize this tax credit for up to 20 years if you choose to. Okay. That's probably the biggest incentive that's out there. Now, in Iowa or in this area also, if you happen to be a business owner, a solar array is simply a piece of equipment.
Oh, M&E.
And if you're a business owner, whether it's a truck, a computer, or a hammer or a solar array, it can be depreciated, as a business expense. So that's another potential incentive that we will at least visit with people about. And then you take it to whomever does your taxes and say, look, I just bought this solar array. Do I have the ability to do this? Right?
And that may be something with a lot of folks who are now working from home. Now their home has become their office. Does it qualify? Does it not?
That's a tax question.
Tax question.
Absolutely, that's a tax question. So, but when you combine those two incentives, obviously you could offset a significant amount of your solar array cost at tax time. Okay.
Funding options, and I know for some folks that are saying, you know what, I would love to do this, but what are we talking about here? Are there places that I can get help with, things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because contrary to some of the advertising that people might be seeing going around on social media where, solar is free, you don't have to pay for it, there is no cost. Solar array does cost money, okay? And once we go through a process where we physically get a size and we get a number, it's at that point that we will talk to the person and say, there are several ways that you can fund a solar array. You obviously can pay cash for it if you choose to.
Right.
Some people can, some people cannot. You can do conventional financing, go to a bank, go to a credit union. There are potential leases that you could potentially do if you choose to go down that route, maybe more so for a business owner, okay? But there are also specific companies that do solar financing. And what I'm talking about is maybe an extended term financing where it might be a 10-year contract or even a 15-year contract or sometimes 20 or 25. And if that is something that you need to be able to get into a solar array, it's definitely something that we should look at. And then once again, we do the math to see if it makes sense. Because if you go to a solar finance company, they will offer extended terms where the payments can be low. And a lot of times to get into a solar array, there could be potentially no money out of your pocket. Once again, it doesn't work for everybody, but it's something that needs to be addressed. We obviously can help you with that. We're not a bank.
Right.
So we will send you to whomever.
That might help out on something like
Absolutely. If that's something that we have to talk about, let's talk about it up front. Let's get all of these details done before we pull the trigger and go.
I know there are some myths out there about having solar panels on your house particularly, and one of them is, it puts a lot of weight on the roof, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk about that.
Yep, another thing that comes up in every seminar that I do. When you look at the weight of a solar array, the weight is dispersed across a large amount of roof plane if we're putting it on the roof. And if we're talking about a typical residential installation, it's going to add about 2.5 pounds per square foot.
That's not a lot.
That is not a lot of weight, because I know if I go up and stand on your roof here in Dubuque, I'm going to be I'm not going to say how much, but let's just say that it's more than 2.5 pounds.
Okay, we'll go with 3 pounds. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know what, it is an insignificant amount, because, most roofs today, are more than capable of handling that particular weight. If there is a particular jurisdiction that requires an inspection of the roof, or they have to be convinced that it's sturdy enough, that's something that, as a company, most solar companies do have the ability to do that, to make sure that everything is done, correctly and safe.
Absolutely. Another thing is, and I've heard this too, well, what if we get a hailstorm or an ice storm or something like that? Are they easily damaged? Do they need to be replaced right away? I don't know how sensitive they are.
It's interesting, because when we started in 2010, there were very few times that we physically had to, take a solar array off a roof, and then somebody would, either redo the roof and then we would reinstall that. Okay? Because what you need to do is you need to make sure that your roof is okay before you put something on it.
Absolutely, yeah.
But if an incident happens, and we actually had a really large incident that happened a couple of years ago, and it's called a derecho.
Oh, yes.
So what happened there is, I think, we probably swapped out maybe 2 arrays in our first 10 years of business or 9 years of business. But when the derecho hit Cedar Rapids, we did 95 tear-offs and reinstalls. And it's not that the solar array, got torn off the roof. It's that everything else around it, and it had to be, disassembled.
Right.
They had to put
readjusted.
They had to put a new roof on their house, and then we would reinstall that. Ultimately, to answer your question, is a solar array is tough. It's rated to withstand, a certain amount of hail, golf ball sized piece of hail, at a reasonable, wind speed, okay, 75 or 100 miles an hour. That doesn't mean that they don't break. If you get softball size hail, solar array is going to break. Okay, it's like anything else. They're not rated to withstand that much.
Right.
All right. So ultimately, I think the question comes up when people talk about this is, well, what happens? Should I insure my array? Okay. And it is something that we address with everybody, because you do have options. If you're a person that has the ability to pay cash for your solar array, you can choose to insure your solar array or not. You don't have to if you do not want to. And that's about risk. If you're a person that, has to, finance it or lease it or something like that, the financing institute, the bank or the credit union is probably going to require that you have some sort of insurance coverage on this, because this is a piece of equipment. Okay. So once again, each situation is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And it's not that the insurance is expensive, because it's not really expensive at all. It's just a matter of, do you have to have it or do you not want it? Personally, I didn't insure my array. Okay, my array is not very large and so on, and I didn't spend the money. It wasn't that it was expensive. I just chose not to do that. Now, having ownership in a solar company doesn't hurt, okay? But it is.
You know the right guys, Larry.
I know somebody. I know a guy named Jim. But that is something that people have to address if that's the case. And once again, it's about risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can choose to take the risk, or if the Finance Institute requires it, well, then you don't have a choice. You have to do that.
So when someone is going to start in the process and get into a successful project, where do you start?
Okay. After we educate you, okay, somewhere along the line, somebody is probably going to ask the question about, once again, how much does a solar array cost? Mm-hmm. And it has to be addressed. So what I typically say to people, I answer that question with a question. And I might say, can you tell me who your utility is, what your rate code is, how many kilowatt hours of electricity you consume on an annual basis broken down monthly, and what you pay for every kilowatt hour of electricity that's delivered to your door? The vast majority of the people are going to say, well, I don't have that committed to memory.
Have to go get their electric bill. Yeah.
You're exactly right, because those 4 tidbits of information are on your electricity bill. And that's one of the very first things that solar companies will gather, because that's where I get the information to start the math. Because once I have that information, I can build a tentative project for you. This is how big it is. This is how many solar panels it is. This is where we're going to put it. This is how much it's going to cost. These are the potential incentives that you're eligible for. This is the type of equipment that we're going to use. And then we deliver that back, or somebody delivers that back to you. And it's at that point we show you the math.
Yep.
And then you, as a consumer, as you take this all in, can figure out whether that makes sense for you. So that's a very critical part. Just the only thing that we really ask for is, give me your bills.
Yeah.
Because
let's look them over.
I'll show you the math. And then you, since I've already educated you on all the things that we discussed previously, you make a determination of whether or not it's a
affordable
good deal.
And it makes sense.
And it makes sense for you.
Absolutely.
Right.
Larry, I'd be remiss to let you go without asking you, you've got an open house coming up next week, is that right?
We do. On Thursday, we're having an open house in our corporate headquarters, which is at 2400 Kerper Boulevard. We're inviting the business community. We're inviting the public to come in. Eagle Point Solar isn't necessarily a walk-in business per se. We're a construction company, and we do designs, and we do all of our own builds. We just want to have people come in and check us out, to see what we're about. Come and talk with our employees. Look at some of the projects, that we've done. It's about, maybe reintroducing Eagle Point Solar to the Dubuque community. I don't think there's a lot of people that know that, we have 110 employees.
Wow.
We have multiple locations in 3 states. And that's what we want to do. We wanted to change that and just say, come check us out.
Absolutely. So June 22nd, folks, come. What time, Larry?
4 to 6.
4 to 6.
4 to
Drop on
6.
by if you want to just, check them out and get some information. Larry, I think I might have 2 or 3 shows. Love to have you back again sometime and answer some questions. Is that okay?
I would be happy to do it.
Sounds great. Thank you, Larry, for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And again, folks, Larry Steffen, he is one of the owners of Eagle Point Solar right here in Dubuque, also executive vice president of that company. Folks, as always, join me right here 12:30 Monday through Friday. So for today, for Voices of the Tri-States, I'm Cindy Coleman.